Good evening, students. This is Pallab Kumar Sarker, Assistant Professor of English from your college. Today I am going to talk about LCC-4, which is for the students of 4th semester program course. In LCC-4, you have 5 units. In Unit 1, you have a poem from the Romantic poet Percy Shelley, and the title of the poem is The Cloud. In Unit 2, you have another poem from another Romantic poet, John Keats, and the title of the poem is To One Who Has Been Long in City Pent. In Unit 3, you have a story from M.K. Gandhi, and the title of the story is How a Client Was Saved. In Unit 4, we have another short story from the American poet and short story writer Edgar Allan Poe, and the title of the short story is The Pit and the Pendulum. Lastly, we have in Unit 5 another short story from James Joyce, and the selected short story is Evelyn. Now I am going to discuss very briefly, one by one, each unit. So, in first unit, you have a poem from Percy Shelley. Percy Shelley is one of the most remarkable poets of English literature, and The Cloud is one of the finest poems from him. This particular poem is a kind of autobiography of the cloud. In this poem, we find a poetic device known as personification. So what is personification? If I speak very simply or in very simple language, then you can say that a personification is a poetic device in which nature or natural objects are imagined as human beings. They are presented in such a way as if they are like human beings. So here, the cloud is presented in such a way that as if it is a human being. In this particular poem, as if the cloud is telling its own story. The poem can be divided into 2 parts. In the first part, different activities of the cloud or the role of the cloud has been presented, and in the second part, changeability of the cloud has been presented. The cloud says that it performs different roles. It has different activities. It brings shower for the thirsty flowers. It brings rain. It gives shade to the plants. It is accompanied by lightning. It brings hailstorm and lots of other things also. In the second part of the poem, the cloud says that it only changes but never dies. The cloud changes its forms. It takes different forms, but it never dies. So the water cycle is actually presented in the second part of the poem. You know, the water of the earth's surface, water from different water bodies like lake, pond, river, seas, oceans are evaporated and they become water vapors. It rises to the sky and as you know, when we rise from the earth's surface, the more we rise, the temperature goes down. So when the water vapors rises very high in the sky, they are condensed and they become cloud. When the cloud becomes more condensed due to very low temperature, the cloud is transformed into water drops. When the water drops become heavy, they come down on the earth due to the gravitational force, and it is called rain. So, water is transforming into water vapor is transforming into cloud is transforming into rain, and rain is transforming into water. So a kind of cycle is there in the nature. So the cloud is rightly saying that I can change, but I never dies. So in this very beautiful poem, the poet not only provides the different roles and activities performed by the cloud, but he is also dealing with a natural phenomena, that is the water cycle, that is the changeability of nature, that is the metamorphosis of the cloud, which changes but never dies. Our next unit is a poem from John Keats, and the title of the poem is To One Who Has Been Long in City Pent. This particular poem describes the experience of a city dweller, one who lives in a city for a long period of time. And one day he goes on a holiday to the countryside, to the village side. Now, having been living in a city for a long time, the person finds in the countryside such a joy, such a delight, which he never experienced before. The open air, the blue sky filled his heart with joy. The countryside which he visits is free from the hustle bustle of the city. which is free from the noise, which is free from the dust of the city life. But the day of the city dweller is spent so quickly that as if it is the twinkling of an eye. So, in this particular poem, a person who is living in a city for a long period of a time visits the countryside and finds the place very pleasant. He feels very happy and delighted in the bosom of nature, in the lap of nature. This particular poem reminds me a beautiful line from another romantic poet, William Wordsworth, who said, "Nature never did betray the heart that loved her." So a person who was confined in his city life, which is very noisy, which is always busy, finds immense pleasure in the beautiful nature of a countryside. So, a city dweller's experience of a day in a countryside has been presented in this particular poem. Now I will pass on to the third unit, a story by M.K. Gandhi, popularly known to as Mahatma Gandhi, and the title is How a Client Was Saved. In this particular story, we find the story of a person, namely Rustamji, who was a client of Mahatma Gandhi. Rustamji was very close to Mahatma Gandhi. He even discussed his family matters with Mahatma Gandhi and always sought suggestions from Gandhiji. But he has concealed one thing, he has hidden one thing from Gandhiji, and the thing is that he was a businessman, he was an exporter and importer, but he was smuggling, he was evading tax, and one day it is detected and the police arrested him. Then Rustamji came to Gandhiji. Gandhiji tells Rustamji to tell him the truth. Rustamji confesses everything to Gandhiji. He wanted to give bribe to the custom officers so that he is not jailed. But Gandhiji advises him to confess his crime. Though Rustamji hesitates in the beginning, but ultimately he agrees with the suggestion of Mahatma Gandhi. He approaches the custom officers and admits his guilt. Gandhiji also consults with the custom officer, and as Rustamji confesses his guilt, he was fined double the amount of objects he has smuggled till date. And Rustamji paid the fine, and ultimately he is released. Now, many people who are known to Gandhiji tell him that Rustamji will do the same crime again. But Gandhiji trusts Rustamji, and Rustamji promises Gandhiji that he will never commit this kind of a crime in future. So how truth can save someone has been shown through this story. You know, our life is a journey, and in this journey of life we may commit some mistakes. But if we admit our mistake and if we resolve not to commit that kind of mistakes in future, then we can reach our goal. It is said that failure is the pillar of success. It means that from failures we can take lesson of not committing those kind of failures. So, by this story, we can learn that we may commit mistakes, but we have to admit our mistake and we have to resolve that we will not commit those mistakes again in our life. So this is unit 3, how a client was saved. The client is Rustamji, and how he was saved by Mahatma Gandhiji. That is the story of this particular short story. In unit 4, we have a short story from the famous American poet and short story writer Edgar Allan Poe. The story is about a person, an unnamed person. The unnamed narrator of the story was imprisoned. He was brought before a jury, a bench of judges, due to some crime. He was imprisoned. He finds himself in a dark room. He tried to measure the room, in the darkness. But he is tripped. He falls down. And when he falls down, he sees that he is in the edge of a pit. A pit is a very deep hole. So, if he was not tripped, if he was not fallen on the edge of the pit, he would have fallen inside the pit and he would have died. So he was lucky. However, he lost his consciousness. And when he regains his consciousness, he finds himself strapped to some wooden log. He was lying on the floor, and over him, from the ceiling of that room, was hanging a pendulum. And the pendulum was razor sharp, that was very sharp. And it was designed in such a manner that when the pendulum begins to swing, it would touch the chest of the prisoner, and the prisoner would die. But luckily there were some rats. The rats came there for some pieces of rotten meat, and they cut the straps by which the prisoner or the narrator was bound to the wooden log. The rats cut it. So the prisoner is set free and he removes himself just before the swing of the pendulum, and he is saved. The pendulum is taken away, but mysteriously all the walls of the room were moving towards him. And he would have squeezed inside the walls. But suddenly it stopped. He hears the noises of many people. Actually, the French army has invaded and captured the city of Toledo. They have come near the prison also, and the narrator is saved. Look, in this particular story, actually, what is presented is that how the prisoners were tortured by the Spanish Inquisition, by the Spanish authority of the time, that has been presented here. The unnamed narrator is very lucky. He miraculously survived. But most of the prisoners, most of the victims were unfortunate to succumb to the torture of the Spanish Inquisition or the Spanish authority. So this story reveals or exposes the torture on the people, on the prisoners of the time by the Spanish Inquisition. Now, the last unit, another short story by the great novelist as well as short story writer James Joyce. The short story is about a girl, namely Evelyn, and the title of the story is also Evelyn, after the girl's name. In this short story, Evelyn, who is living with her father and brother, she has already lost her mother. Her father was very rude. He is very angry. He behaves roughly with both the boy and the girl. In fact, her father always abuses even physically abuses her brother and herself. So she is very sad. She is not at all happy. But luckily, she finds a lover in her workplace, and she decides to run away with his lover. She dreams of going to some other town and lead a happy life there, away from the clutches of her father, away from the tortures of her father. And the day has come. She decides to run away with her lover. And after taking all her belongings, she prepares for the escape. But just before escaping, she remembers her mother. Her mother, while on deathbed, told her to take care of her family. And when Evelyn calls up her mother's words, she becomes emotional and she decides not to run away with her lover. This is the story of Evelyn. Now look, this particular story is often linked with James Joyce's another story, Arabi. You know, in our life, We always want to be happy. We always run after happiness. But the truth of life is that you can only run after your goal. You can only run after your ideal. But an ideal cannot be attained. Life is like that. Something may appear very fascinating, something may appear very alluring, but when you are faced with the reality, you see that the fascinating thing, the alluring thing, is not at all fascinating at all. So a kind of disillusionment with life is presented through the story Evelyn. So this was a very short discussion on the 5 units of the paper LCC-4. It is not enough, but I have tried to give you some idea about this paper. Now, if you go through the texts of the units which are already discussed, I hope you will understand them better. And for your upcoming examination, that is 4th semester examination, you are already informed of the fact that the examination will be held in online mode, and in each paper you will have 3 questions, but you have to answer 2 out of the 3. In this paper you will have 40 marks. In the written paper, 10 marks for the attendance and continuous evaluation. For 40 marks, 3 questions will be set, each carrying 20. You have to answer 2 out of the 3. So, prepare yourself properly for the upcoming examination, and I wish you good luck for your upcoming examination. Hope you will prepare yourself and you will have good results in your examination. Thank you very much.